Sex at its core is energy exchange, and good sex is about flow. Now, consciousness has four primary operating systems that correspond to different states of brain development, different states of consciousness development. And this begins with the 200-million-year-old alligator or the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain has three basic protocols: fight, flight, and freeze. It's a sociopathic dynamic. It's basically dealing in the terrain of power. And the protocol is to run from something that is bigger than you, attack and feed on something that is smaller than you, or freeze if neither of those options are expedient. So we're dealing with a sociopathic survival brain, survival protocol. Now, people who are traumatized, people who have PTSD, people who have complex PTSD, reptiles, are largely stuck in the reptilian brain. And so when we look through that lens at the world, it's who's scary, who can be used, how do we hide? Now, as a human being, we also add another element in conjunction with the reptilian brain, which is rationality and also pleasing. The prostitute, right? Giving pleasure, enabling, serving someone who's powerful, someone to get something that we want, that we need. To please someone is an addition to the reptilian brain. We have fight, flight, freeze, and please, right? And if you look at the pleasing dynamic, it's always a childlike figure in relationship with authority, right? I'll do whatever you say, boss, just take care of me. I'll do whatever you want, mom and dad, just don't abandon me, right? I'll do whatever you want, lover, but take care of me, put me first, right? So why? To meet the need for survival and security of survival. And so we're in that domain. Now, obviously, as we're in the power dimension, this isn't the love dimension of empathy, of emotion. It's a terrain of fear, and it's a terrain of power. And so in this type of dynamic, you see power climbing, you see betrayal, you see usury, you see deceit, you see enabling, you see codependency, and you see sacrifice, like I'll take the hit for for you, and then you're going to take care of me. It's a domain of ego, right? I don't really care about you. What I care about is my own ego, and do you make me look good, right? In that terrain of power, in that terrain of seeking gratification, seeking survival, seeking security. So anyone who's in that place, and we all have that brain, is going to connect based on their dominant pole, right? So some people are locked in freeze. This can be a dynamic of traumatic event where we've had a series of traumatic experiences. What kept us alive was freezing. So we know how to freeze when we're in fear, when we're in a survival state, right? And so freeze is, a dynamic that it tends to be more feminine. In a polarity, it will tend to be, it's a more feminine posture. The feminine side of a man, the feminine side of a woman is going to freeze or it's going to please. regardless of gender, right? If it seems like that's the best way to reduce conflict and to survive. So whoever has the most power, whoever is the most dominant, whoever is the most needed will be in the masculine pole. This can be a dominant and wealthy woman who's politically well connected, for example. She'll be in the dominant role in sex that involves the reptilian brain. And the more the focus is on power and survival, the more one or both people are in the reptilian brain. Now, the next step in evolution is rational self-interest or enlightened self-interest. That can also be a part of it. Rational self-interest is, I'm going to do what's good for me. So it's not a fight, flight, freeze instinct. It's an analysis. I don't really love this person, but it's a good step in my career to sleep with them. I don't really care about this person, but it feels good to sleep with them, so I'm going to do this. Or they want to sleep with someone like this and like this, so I'm going to pretend to be like this and like this, because rationally, that's going to lead to sex, right? So there isn't a lot of empathy. There's a slight transcendence of the fight, flight, and freeze dynamic, or if it's participated in. If someone freezes, it's because they're analyzing and saying, well, that's the right thing to do. I shouldn't provoke him in this situation. I shouldn't upset, the client in this situation. They might fire me, etc. So, I'll do what is necessary to, keep the flow going so that I can gain security. It's not just survival, it's more security and survival. But it's still relatively cold. There may be desperation, like don't leave me, I need you, but it's relatively cold in terms of it's self-centered, right? And that can transition a little bit into enlightened self-interest where I'll help you. Like I'll give you the money that you need, and then you give me this energy or attention that I want, or I'll give you this attention and energy that I want or need, and you give me the money or the power, or I'll do this and make you look good, and you'll give me a leg up in the power game, in the social climbing within the cult. So now we're, but it's in this whole terrain, there's a sense of fairness, like I helped you here, you should help me there. But there isn't any sense of presence or empathy. There's just a sense of these are the rules, right? I'll give you that if you give me this. So it's a very transactional type of sex, right? And it can be power sex, it can be money sex, it can be physical sex, but it's using pattern recognition in a calculated way to secure more security in our survival, to amass and get more. And this can, because greed is a lot about securing in this mental dimension, this can be, as far as someone gets in their evolution, right? I just want more so that I can have more. I want more money. I want more prestige. I want more recognition. I want more in a way that bolsters my sense of social, financial, mental, physical, emotional survival, right? So that's sex at a mental level. And in order to move to the next level, because we have the reptilian brain and we have the rational brain, and these are sex at both of these levels. In order to go to the next level of empathy with the empathic brain, we have to transcend the self. Not really the self, the ego. We have to transcend the limited identity of the ego. And we have to be caring. We have to establish a relay of energy, emotional energy, that actually transcends the ego, the individual identity. So this is the movement from self-absorption to what we think of as human love. It's also the first time the human animal becomes the human being, right? Where I actually understand what it's like to be you, and I do something different out of that understanding. I transcend the barrier of the isolated survival identity, right? So I go beyond. Now, we have to transcend greed, where it's all about getting more and more and more in order to enter the state of empathy, in order to be human, in order to experience the heartfelt sense of love and belonging, where we love enough to care, where we care enough to take time, where we take enough time to see not only ourselves, but another, where we see enough to understand, where we understand enough to empathize, where we empathize enough to attune, and where we attune enough to succeed at facilitating, at supporting and enabling the fulfillment of first our own human needs to survive, to be secure, to experience love and belonging, to experience self-esteem, to discover and develop our gifts, to create a high level of abundance by bringing value with those gifts into the world and becoming part of something bigger than ourselves, our human needs. Right? And out of empathy, out of the empathic neural net, the human region of the body, the brain, the heart, we learn to love ourselves. And once we have fulfilled our own human needs, our greatest joy, our greatest sense of fulfillment and satisfaction is learning to love others. It's just more fun than sheer survival with fight, flight, freeze dynamics. It's more fun than the greed of more and more stuff for us. It's more fun to be empathic in a competent state than to be sociopathic in a competent state. It's more fun to be sociopathic in a competent state than in an incompetent state, but it's also more fun to be empathic in a competent state than sociopathic in a competent state. There's more enjoyment, right? So we attune to help another person succeed in fulfilling their needs for survival, for security, for love and belonging, etc., etc. And thus the virus of a new operating system, the virus of a new brain spreads, fulfilling ourselves, touching others, right? Becomes a self-perpetuating virus, because if we succeed in loving one other person to an extent where they fulfill their own needs at a deep level, they will feel safety, trust, gratitude, pleasure, joy, expansion, and empathy. Right? So we know when we've succeeded at loving ourselves, at fulfilling our own needs, when we feel that way. And we know that we've succeeded in loving another or others when they feel that way. And of course, it's a grayscale, right? Someone might feel a little bit more secure, but not trusting, or they trust this but not that, right? It's a grayscale, right? But when we succeed, the symptoms of the virus of human love spreading is always gratitude, pleasure, healing, trust, connection, right? And that virus, when it succeeds in spreading competently, right? When we are surrounded with people who embody the virus of human love, who have the competency to love enough to care enough to take enough time to see enough to understand enough to empathize enough to attune, to change successfully enough to fulfill their own and another human being's needs. The symptoms of trust, of gratitude, of joy, of expansion and connection are always there. And when we are surrounded, when the virus of love has reached a certain level for a sustained period, the temperature rises. And a good way of looking at this evolution in love and this evolution of the brain is like a bud, right? It's a very tight, woven bud of a flower, right? And the bud slowly starts very tight in a very cold temperature. The reptilian brain is cold, it's icy. A reptilian world is cold, it's filled with betrayal. It's filled, the reptilian world is a world where the bigger one will exploit and consume and destroy the small one because they can. Where the small ones have to run and hide from the big ones. It's a reptilian world. It's a very cold world. Right? And so that cold world of competition, comparison, etc., breeds for competence in a very cold and reptilian environment, right? Only the strongest survive. Only the brightest survive. The rest are consumed, used. It's a very cold world, but it breeds for competence. And competence creates abundance, a certain amount of it. And that abundance raises the temperature. And so the flower begins to open, right? With the rational reptile, the narcissistic, traumatized, self-absorbed, enlightened self-interest ego, where I'll do that for you because then you'll do this for me, right? You get a beginning bud, right? And when a lot of people are collaborating out of enlightened self-interest, you have more abundance. There's more warmth in the environment. Feels good, right? So the flower, the brain, the consciousness opens up a little bit more. And when it does, what's there is the beauty of empathic love. To feel a little bit of a connection of, oh, you're over there. That's what it's like to be you. I'm touched. There's a little bit of you and me. Mirror neurons begin to flow back and forth, not for the purpose of calculating how to do harm and how to exploit, but now for the purpose of giving pleasure, giving well-being. So there's a sense of abundance. There's a sense of blossoming, right? We move into that empathy. And you see, when you create empathy, you create trustworthiness. When you create trustworthiness, you create trust. When you have trust on the foundation of trustworthiness, all of the energy that used to be allocated towards defense, towards protection, towards analyzing lies, etc., can be repurposed to generating a higher level of abundance. Right? The metal, the money going into the lock and going into the key and going into the password and going into looking around and checking what so-and-so is doing and hiring a detective and a police force and a military. When people are competently empathic, now how do you tell when people are competently empathic, right? Well, there's two cues. There's two symptoms that this is the state that we're in. And the cue is, number one, it's we, not I, right? The fight, flight, freeze brain is me against the world. The individual is alone. The empathic brain, there is no isolation. There's a we, right? So the two prominent questions that lead the way, that tell us that we're beginning to move primarily from enlightened self-interest and calculation and manipulation into the world of empathy are these. Who is in the most pain? Why? Because pain is louder than well-being. So it's the priority. The brain naturally orients to relieve pain and achieves higher yields by doing so. Like you saw me picking there's a little itch in my nose there, right? But my hand kept going there. Why? Right? Because it's the one area of discomfort. Everything else is fine. My body is saying there's an itch, there's an itch, there's an itch. And so all of this attention just keeps getting drawn to this tiny little area. See, there's no problem here, there's no problem there, there's no problem here, 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 here. There's just this little area. And yet, that could have derailed this conversation, right? There is a tendency to dwell in and obsess on discomfort, negativity, risk, fear, etc. Because the brain blows it 5 to 1 out of proportion, right? Something that's negative, the brain will focus on it 5 times more than this. Why? Because everything's great here. Everything's great here, so there's no focus on it. It's making this 5, it's making it, in some cases, 100 times bigger. Right? There's this interesting idea, yeah, who cares? There's an itch right there. Right? And the brain is just making it really big. Can I concentrate on what I'm saying? I gotta. And so that's why the first step in the empathic dance is who is in the most pain. Because empathy is about transcending the barrier where you matter as much as I do. Well, if that's the case, then in your group, there will always be one person who's in more pain than the others. So the first question is, who is that person? Is that me right now? Is that you? Who's in the most pain? That's the starting point. It's not the finishing. The finishing is who has the most opportunity, who has the most joy to celebrate, who has the greatest probability jump point. And let's help them make that jump, right? That's where it ends. But the beginning, as we enter the empathic regions of sexuality in the brain, is who's in the most pain and how can we help? Now you're in the land of empathy, the region of the empathic brain. Now, in this point, sexuality is about giving pleasure. It's about, I want to do this. Oh, look at your face. You look so beautiful. Why touch your body? Because I see how much it relaxes you, how it opens you up. I love just seeing how you respond. And it doesn't have to be me. I like watching you be touched by the person you love the most. I like seeing you in love. I like seeing you happy. Oh, it's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Wow. I see you, and I want to take this pain off of you. Oh, that hurt. Let me be with you. Let me listen to that, right? And then I want to see you happy, right? We're entering the first domain that is about the other. So it's also a transcendence of the ego, right? Before it was all about my survival and my security. Now it's about your ego, your security, and your feeling of empathy, your feeling of love. It's just so beautiful to see that, to be with that, right? So obviously, the majority of our species, the majority of the time, with the majority of people, are not in that state, right? The child love of I want, I need, the adolescent love of I desire control, I desire lust, I want this to be in this and that way. The child, the adolescent love, the sympathy, the antipathy, the synergy, the synthesis. We're not there as a species, right? Most people don't care enough to take the time, don't take enough time to see, don't see enough to understand. They're in a state of constant shock. If you ask married couples around the world, around the country, a series of 10 or 20 pretty basic questions and ask what they think the other person would say, or you'll find a very large percentage of people who have not taken enough time to see and have not seen enough to understand. And so there's no basis for empathy with what is unknown, right? Well, we're moving as the species moves from basic insecurity of survival to survival, and then as a percentage of the species moves from survival to security of survival, something many people don't have, to basic love and belonging, the third need, that, again, many people do not have a basic sense of love and belonging. I don't belong here. I don't belong there. I don't belong anywhere. I don't love myself, and there's no one who deeply loves me, right? It is a crisis as the empathic brain, as the empathic biology opens up in a desert of a culture that does not teach the competency of human love. We have a crisis. It's an ache, it's a pain that we feed with addiction, that we feed with distraction. I don't want to feel that pain, that emptiness, that silence. I don't want to keep knocking on the empty door where someone's hiding, trying to be avoided, right? So there's a silence, there's a void. And pain is the separation from and the longing for. I want to belong, but I don't. I want to trust you, but I don't. I want to be trustworthy, but I'm not. I want to empathize with myself, but I don't. I want to empathize with you, but I don't. Right? So, this is the crisis of our time, that 3,000 Rolls Royces cannot fill that ache. Binge watching 72 episodes of high adrenaline and high dopamine Netflix cannot fill the void. On the other side, I want love, I want belonging. and I feel alone. So this pain, right? And this doubling down, right, on the compulsions and behavior and thinking and feeling to try and manage that ache. Right? But at a certain point, and perhaps 2% of the species, a good percentage of the time, is in a competent state of human love. Perhaps 5% of the species has a rich understanding and familiarity with human love, understanding what it is to love another human being. Now, it's also worth noticing that, an empathic lover can engage with a sociopathic lover. A sociopathic lover simply means that their trauma has not been addressed enough for the coldness that is used to dissociate from the traumatic event to be melted, for the pain, for the grief to be integrated. And so if you have a reptilian brain, because you have the 4 basic brains, right? If you have the empathic brain loving someone in a reptilian state, the rational reptile, you could have one or the other, right? So you have someone in an empathic state that sees beauty, truth, and goodness, that projects something magnificent in the other person. And the other person looks at them and say, they trust me. How could I use that? How could I take advantage of that? Let's see, what would be the best thing for me? I know, I'll lie about this, I'll do this, I'll pretend this, I'll have sex, and then I'll go get some more for me. I'll do something else, right? I'll do more for me. And the other person looks and sees the goddess, sees the God, sees the potential, sees the beauty, truth, and goodness that is inside each human being. Falls in love and wants to connect and is used and is betrayed and is lied to, and the trust is broken. And often the response to this is to descend into a reptilian state. The pain of betrayal, the pain of contracting the virus of usury and betrayal is so painful, it's mind-numbing. And so the heart of the empath shuts down, and they go into survival and security, into a maintenance mode of preservation, like I've got to just stop myself from descending into utter and total despair, misery, hopelessness. Right? And then in that state, they'll stabilize, perhaps in the rational brain, and keep navigating based on what makes sense, but I don't feel alive. My humanity has been raped, has been killed off. Trust has been broken. It's painful. It's devastating to the human heart, to the empathic brain. It's not devastating, though, to the reptile, to the sociopath. They're oblivious, right? That's the benefit, right? You have an anesthetic that knocks off all awareness. Right. Now, sometimes, right, it works the other way around, right? Sometimes the person is lifted up, right? So the person we're giving love to is in a reptilian state, is a sociopath in a very cold state. And sometimes the love from a place of abundance, not a place of betrayal of ourselves. Like if we're still in scarcity around survival, security, love, and belonging, then to try and give empathic love to a reptile, right, is a betrayal of ourself, right? We don't have the reserves yet to actually infect someone else with empathic love. We're not fully holding it ourselves. We're just putting ice on the bud that is beginning to blossom. And we need to put on more heat. We need to surround ourselves with empathic energy so that we have a chance to develop into that brain in a confident enough way that we can have patience while someone betrays us, while someone lies to us, right? And not take it personally. Because if we're insecure, we will take it personally. Right? But if we understand the states of brain development, and we say, yeah, you're cheating me, you're lying, you're doing this, but why are you doing that, right? You do have the option of being seen in your reptilian state and loved and valued there. And you do have the option of growing out of it, if you're willing, right? And when you're willing, come on around, right? You know, that's, you know, when you have a certain state of security, of deep love and belonging for oneself, one can extend a hand to someone in a reptilian state and help them heal the trauma that is keeping them there, and watch the miracle of that blossoming. Now, we could end here because certainly, right, 95% of the species is still learning the art of empathy, the art of human love. 95% of the species spends a fair amount of time in the reptilian state, in the rational reptile state of manipulation and fear based on pain and scarcity that produces the pain. But there is a whole another world on the other side of human love. Once 90% of the species becomes human, spends the majority of their time in the human brain because it's more fun. Then you have the final blossoming, the transcendence of separation, not the empathy for the other, but the awareness of one, the awareness of the boundary blurring between ourself and the other. We become gods and goddesses by seeing the divine, by seeing the god and goddess in the other, and experiencing the ecstasy, the ecstasis, the transcendence of the myopia, of the loneliness, of the isolation, the joy of being a part of it all, of being one with one another and acting out of that oneness. Now, that's divine love. That's divine sex, right? When you have an orgasm that opens the door into all that is, to the joy, the beauty, the wonder of all that is. And there is no boundary between us and the reality that we are a part of. That's the most joyful, the most fulfilling sex of all. because it includes a love of the reptile that bred for competency, of the competent reptile that bred for greed, of the human that began to uncurl from its shell and care about self and others. And it also cares for the one, for all things. But it is a progression, and it's important to understand the correlation between ecology, between temperature and development, between temperature and bud. It's in ecology. The bud opens in response to warmth. Warmth is created in response to competency. The higher the degree of love, the higher the degree of consciousness, the warmer the environment. The warmer the environment, the more the petal opens.